big cattle prices, record levels. We've been having this conversation regularly. I feel like a broken record, but I think this may also sound like a broken record protecting your bottom line. But there's some changes coming to LRP for the 2026 reinsurance year. What are some things that producers need to think about, especially as we're looking at prices levels where we are currently?
So before we get into the changes, I guess we'll just kind of start by saying, and we talk about risk protection a lot, and I talk about LRP myself a lot because a lot of folks I work with, that's what they tend to gravitate towards. We're not a big contracting area, so LRP tends to get used more than probably anything. And just utilizing something, LRP being one potential strategy to capitalize on these prices, I think has merit, period, right? To cover your downside and protect yourself or protect some of this or keep some of this market run up. So that's kind of the big picture. LRP's kind of been an evolving insurance product, I guess I would say. I'm pretty sure, Meghan, it first became available in Kentucky in 2007, although I could be mistaken. But it's become much more attractive recently for several reasons, and it kind of continues to evolve over time. So there were four, I think, very significant things that are going to change with the new reinsurance year, which really means any policy effective after July 1 of 2025 is what that really means. So I'll just kind of hit these high level, and just for clarity, there were some other changes that matter, deadlines, dates that I'm not going to talk about. And then there's some details about paperwork requirements that I'm also not going to get into. We're just going to kind of stay high level and talk about, what's changed, what should you know about, and then typical qualifier, talk to an insurance person to kind of get the specifics. But the first one, this has been talked about for a while, is that forward contracted cattle can now be covered prior to possession. So previously, you had to physically have possession of the cattle to cover them with LRP. Now, potentially, they can be covered as soon as you bear price risk for them. So that's an interesting thing, because if I forward price cattle to be delivered to me a month or two down the road, I can go ahead and protect myself for their eventual value as either fat cattle or feeder cattle. That is significant, and that is a change worth talking about. There's two new categories that have been added. Type, I guess, is the word that they use, not category, but types for coverage. So one is cull dairy cows. So dairy cows that are going to be culled enter the beef system. The other one, though, this is a little bit confusing, is unborn calves. And of course, we've been able to cover unborn bulls and heifers for a while, but this category is really for calves that are going to be sold at a couple weeks of age, which is not common practice in the beef sector. It really kind of speaks to beef on dairy, right? And you can cover beef calves, you can cover beef on dairy calves, but realistically, we're talking about beef on dairy calves. So I think the weight range on this is 59 pounds to 100 pounds, less than a month of age. So this is really designed for, I think, beef on dairy cattle, those dairy operations that do tend to move those calves at a pretty young age. The third change I'll mention is they've added a drought hardship exemption. So if drought worsens in the area that you have the cattle covered from the effective date, well, I should say after the effective date, and you need to sell those cattle sooner, if it worsens enough, then you can actually move those cattle more than 60 days before the ending date and still keep the insurance in place. So that's always been something that's been a concern with some people. But if drought worsens enough, and there's an index used to measure that, then you actually can get around that 60-day rule. And then the last thing I'll just mention, really high level, really briefly, there is language now added that specifically prohibits subsidy capture. I don't know how much of this went on, but there was some discussion about LRP and impact on the market, and folks trying to harvest subsidy by combining an LRP contract with something in the futures market. So it's specifically prohibited now. Both the insured and the agent will certify that they have not done and or have not advised the insured to do that. And then there are some things that are kind of presumed to be subsidy capture, but they're very specific. So for example, if I buy LRP on a given day, and then at the same time I write a put option at roughly the same time period, that expires at roughly the same time as any date on my policy, then that kind of presumes subsidy capture. So they're very specific. So for most folks, it's not going to matter. You can still use your main strategy, but just be aware that that is something that you'll actually certify if you purchase a policy that becomes effective after July 1 of this year, Megan.